still be there. The two other dudes gone. Nice greaser. And so they get two chick records.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Especially Daniel. He's good. He's a man. You know what I mean?
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Let's see if I remember how this goes. Hi, I'm Jonathan Blake. This is my first Shabbat joining you on the Bima since my 3 months of winter study sabbatical. I'm so grateful to be with you. I'm so grateful to extend my appreciation for the gift of deepening my learning and extending my leadership in new and some surprising directions. The congregation has been so incredibly supportive of my recent trip to Poland to visit refugees along the Ukrainian border, and in the coming weeks I'll have opportunities to share more about that trip, especially as we come close to Pesach. It seems meaningful to see the juxtaposition between our own story going from bondage, not directly to freedom, but from bondage to the status of refugees, and from there to freedom, against the backdrop of what we're seeing unfolding in the aftermath of Russia's war against Ukraine. I'm joined on the Bima tonight by Cantor Amanda Kleinman, Cantor Danielle Rodnitsky, Rabbi Daniel Rieser, Rabbi David Levy, our temple president, Warren Haber, and somewhere, there's an Isaac Sonnet Asor, who is just nearing the end of his 4th year of cantorial studies at the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music. Joining him and us in making some spiritual music tonight, we have Pete Malinverni at the piano and Jerome Morris on percussion. And gents, it's really nice to be back with you as well. Thank you. We want to wish Shabbat Shalom to our live streaming congregation and thank Idan Waldman, our live streaming and technical director, who is new on staff at WRT. So if you haven't yet said hi to Idan, he performs a very important role as the intermediary between what happens here and what happens out there in cyberspace. And finally, WRT is very grateful to welcome to our congregation tonight Rabbi Dr. Wendy Zierler and her husband, Daniel Veit. Welcome. We're so happy that you're with us. Dr. Zirler will be our Morgan of Blessed Memory and Margie Miller Scholar in Residence. For years, Marjorie and Morgan Miller have sponsored an annual opportunity for WRT to be enriched through deep scholarship in the Jewish tradition. And every year, we come away just blown over by the intellectual gifts of our guest and also the nourishing waters of our Jewish tradition that continues to astound in its depth and creativity. And Dr. Zirler will surely bring all of that to us this weekend. She is a professor at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. You'll hear more about her impressive credentials a little bit later on, and we'll actually hear from her during our worship tonight, and then following tonight, and then again, tomorrow we'll have opportunities to learn with our distinguished scholar in residence. I do want to extend my personal gratitude to Marjorie Miller, who may be joining us a little bit later this evening and will be with us throughout the weekend. She is a past president of WRT whose leadership in and among this congregation has basically been ceaseless for, 6 decades or more. And this is the first year where we are observing the Scholar in Residence program that she and her late husband, Morgan, dedicated in perpetuity without Morgan, who died this past fall. May his memory continue to be a blessing, and even more, may the gift that they have given to WRT by endowing this weekend continue to give blessing to his name in memory. Should we sing a little bit?
Sounds good.
Okay. We're going to offer Lechu Niranana, a song of praise for Shabbat. You can find it in your prayer books on page 130. Please lift up your voices with ours.
La
Lecha Dodi, you'll find the prayer beginning on page 138. Follow our lead, and when we do this, rise, face the door, and welcome the Shabbat bride.
Ya la 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 lecha dodi, ya la 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 likrat kala, ya la 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 pnei Shabbat, pnei Shabbat nekavel. Ya la 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 lecha dodi, ya la 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 likrat kala, ya la 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 pnei Shabbat. La 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 la, pnei Shabbat, pnei Shabbat nekavela.
Likrat Shabbat,
Likrat Shabbat,
lechu v'nelcha, ki mekor averacha.
Shabbat
146.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
You may be seated.
וירא אלוהים את כל אשר עשה, והנה טוב מאוד. וירא אלוהים את כל אשר עשה, והנה טוב מאוד.
וירא אלוהים את כל אשר עשה, והנה טוב מאוד. וירא אלוהים את כל אשר עשה, והנה טוב מאוד.
There was evening, there was morning,
There was evening, there was morning,
There was evening, there was morning,
Vayerez, vayivoker,
טוב מאוד. ויערב, ויבוקר, טוב מאוד.
152.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
We're going to continue with Micha Mocha on page 158. Thank you. And you're going to notice that we're singing a special melody this week, a melody for Adir Hu. Micha Mocha is a prayer that we often use to signal the approach of a coming holiday, and believe it or not, next Shabbat is Erev Pesach, Erev Passover. And so this melody, traditional for the holiday of Passover, is our melody for Micha Mocha this evening. Page 160. Our prayer, Hashkivenu, asks God to spread a Sukkot Shalom, a sukkah of peace over us and over Jerusalem. And that feels especially important this week after so much terror taking place in the state of Israel, but also in Ukraine. We hope that God provides a sukkah of peace here, there, and everywhere where it is needed. Page 160. Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, v'hamidenu shomrei
164.
Adonai, Sefatai Tiftach, Ufi Agid, Tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Yai, lai, 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 lai. 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 Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avoteinu ve'imoteinu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Ve'konei Hakol, Ve'zocher Chastei Avot ve'imahot, U'mevi Geula livnei bneihem, Leman Shemo be'ahava, Melech Ozer u'Moshia u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham ve'Ezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechaye hakol atah Rav le'Hoshia, Mashiv haruach u'morid hagashem, Mechalkel chayim bechesed, Mechaye hakol berachamim rabim, Somech noflim ve'rofech cholim, Umatir asurim, Umekayem emunato lishenei afar. Micha mocha bal givurot, Umido melach, Melech memit umechaye, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman ata lehachayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechaye hakol. Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kadoshim bechol yom yahalelucha selah. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh.
Please continue your prayers in whatever language, at whatever pace, in whatever physical posture, and silently or aloud, as you so choose, for the next few moments, we pray together.
Teach me, O God, a blessing, a prayer on the mystery of a withered leaf, unripened fruit so fair, on the freedom to see, to sense, to breathe, to know, to hope, to despair. Teach my lips a blessing, a hymn of praise, as each morning and night you renew your days. Lest my days be as the one before, lest routine set my ways. Lamdeni Elohai, parech v'hitpalel, lamed et siftotai, bracha v'shir halel. Lamdeni Elohai, parech v'hitpalel, lamed et siftotai, bracha v'shir halel, bracha v'shir halel.
Shabbat Shalom. Again, our deep thanks to Margie Miller and to her late husband Morgan, in whose name this Scholar in Residence weekend has been established. Margie, we're so glad you can be with us here this evening as we celebrate Shabbat and as we welcome our guest scholar, Rabbi Dr. Wendy Zierler. When I first arrived at Hebrew Union College for rabbinical school, I had, as an undergraduate, been an English major with a minor in Jewish studies. And so when I learned that there was a professor on the faculty who taught modern Jewish literature, I was naturally very interested and intrigued. And it wasn't until I took Dr. Zirler's core curricular course, that is, on modern Jewish literature that I found just how hooked I would be. In the tenure that I had at the school, I took every course that Dr. Zirler had to offer, with the exception of one. I never took movies in Midrash. That's one I'll have to get the book for, and encourage you all to get the book for as well, because it's evidently a great way to study and to learn. More importantly, though, than Dr. Zierler's incredible scholarship and the amazing things that I learned from her in her class was the way that she led the classroom environment. We had, by the end of our time together, developed a little cohort of people who just loved to study with you. And every Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m., those of us who were sort of literarily minded would come together under the foot of our sage, of our Rav, and learn together. It was really an intimate environment, and one that was transformative not only for the mind, but for the heart and for the soul. So let me now more formally introduce Rabbi Dr. Wendy Zierler. Rabbi Zirler is Sigmund Falk Professor of Modern Jewish Literature and Feminist Studies at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York City. She received her PhD and her MA from Princeton University and her BA from Stern College of Yeshiva University, as well as an MFA in fiction writing from Sarah Lawrence College. In June of 2021, she received rabbinic ordination from Yeshivat Maharat. She's the author of Movies in Midrash, Popular Film and Jewish Religious Conversation, which was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award, and also author of the book And Rachel Stole the Idols, The Emergence of Hebrew Women's Writing. She's also authored, edited, and translated many other articles and books in the fields of Jewish literature and in Jewish gender studies. Please welcome now Rabbi Dr. Wendy Zierler.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm so moved to hear my students sing, to do that beautiful rendition of Leah Goldberg's Lamdeni, Benji Schiller's rendition of Leah. Anyway, lots of pride coming from these corners here. seeing my former students be the sterling, beautiful professionals that you are. So those of you who have read my biography know that I'm a professor of modern Jewish literature and a writer and not a dermatologist. So given that, I never would have expected that I would have put together an entire weekend of talks about this skin disease called tzara'at under the guise of the heading Poetry and Pandemics. But as a professor of modern Jewish literature, it's often my scholarly habit to consider how modern writers can recognize themselves in the Jewish literary past and reshape it for the present and for the future. And these past 2+ years of COVID have sent me literally scurrying for every possible Jewish literary response to illness and pandemic, including teaching a course on this very topic this past semester at HUC. The Jewish literary past begins in the Bible, but strangely enough, given the ubiquity of illness and pandemics in human history, there aren't that many accounts of illness in the Bible. We never hear about how our matriarchs or patriarchs get sick, what it is that causes them to die. Here and there in the Bible, epidemics flare as a form of punishment. So coming up next week, we'll see that the 10 plagues include boils and cattle illness, which the Israelites are happily spared. And in response to Korah's rebellion in Numbers 16 to 17, there's a flash epidemic of some sort that Aaron miraculously cures by waving around some incense. More than specific accounts of illness, however, the Bible teems with legal and narrative descriptions and accounts of tzara'at, this skin disease. So Jewish illness discussion, Jewish literary discussion of illness and healing basically begins with sickness of the skin. When I think about skin, my mind takes me back to the time when I was a camper at Jewish summer camp in Canada, where the staff had this penchant for waking us up in the morning to Alan Sherman songs. I don't know how many of you remember Alan Sherman, that parody songwriter, a comedy writer who wrote such parodies as Alan Yetta to the tune of Alouette, or Hallo Mutta, Hallo Fada, set to Poncinelli's Dance of the Hours. But the song, the Alan Sherman song that sticks out in my head the most from those days of camp morning wake-ups was a particular number called Skin. And this is my Shabbos gift for you. Ready? I know that there are the musical theater types in the shul, so here you go. You gotta have skin. All you really need is skin. Skin's the thing that if you got it outside, it helps keep the insides in. It covers your nose, and it wraps around your toes. And inside it you put lemon meringue, and outside you hang your clothes. Skin is what you feel at home in, and without it, furthermore, both your liver and abdomen would keep falling on the floor, and you'd be dressed in your intestine. So this song was a parody of another famous song called Heart from the show Damn Yankees. Heart asserted in good American spirit that all you needed in life or in baseball was pluck, resilience, and determination. In other words, heart. Alan Sherman mischievously insisted to the contrary, that the shell mattered too, not just the core, that a person needed not just heart, but skin. The companion Torah portion of Tazria from last week and Metzora from this week are all about the importance of skin, specifically about what happens when its integrity or purity is compromised by eruptions or scale diseases, as scholar Jacob Milgram prefers to translate the word tzara'at. In order to understand the significance of tzara'at as a paradigmatic Jewish illness, therefore, we need first to consider the biological, social, and anthropological significance of skin. Alan Sherman tells us very succinctly that skin's the thing that if you got it outside, it helps keep the insides in. In other words, it serves as a borderline, a means of keeping bodies, entities, and categories apart. Mary Douglas, the famous British anthropologist and scholar of the book of Leviticus, explains very elegantly that the concern in the laws of Tzara'at and Leviticus as a whole is about boundaries, structures, and containers. And she shows how this concern for boundaries expresses itself not just in the details of the law, but also in the literary form of the book. In Tazria and Metzora, the Torah presents these laws about Tzara'at through a literary structure of containment or covering involving a series of concentric repetitions, rhetorical structures of repetition. So let me explain to you what I mean by this. Leviticus 13 from last week, the parsha of Tazria, begins with the diagnosis of Tzara'at that afflicts the skin. And then it repeats this diagnosis with a focus on the bodily extremities, on the head and on the hair. And then it moves outward from there to clothing. And then it moves outward from there to the walls of one's house. Metzora, the next parasha, this week's parasha, provides the details of how to purify each one of these concentric circles of tzara'at in the same order. And then, as if to create a rhetorical structure to reinforce this notion of boundary or skin, Leviticus 14 begins and ends almost identically. The words zot tiyeh Torah mitzorah. These will be the laws of the mitzorah. That's the way the laws begin. The words zot Torah tarat, these are the laws of tzara'at, mark the end. So this rhetorical structure mirrors the function of healthy skin as a container or a border, one that helps keep the insides in and the outsides out. These laws reflect a certain anxiety on the part of the priestly author that if something afflicts the skin, that if this ultimate marker of human boundaries is afflicted, then it's as though the world is turned inside out. And for that reason, those people whose very bodies mark that breach, those people threaten the existence of our sense of intact borders, and therefore must be relegated to a kind of mini exile outside the camp. But this is only one part of the story, this notion of the skin as a boundary, as a way of keeping things apart and of keeping entities apart. In fact, our tradition reflects another conception of skin, not as a zone of boundary, but as a zone of contact, not as a marker of strict separation and individuation, but of mediation. It is these other forms of symbolism around skin that I would like to explore with you now and, in fact, throughout this weekend. As skin scientist Nina, I didn't even know that was a thing, by the way, but as skin scientist Nina Jablonski explains in her book, Skin, A Natural History, our skin is more than a defensive shield and a gatekeeper. The pores and nerve endings of our skin unite us with our surroundings. Skin is the interface through which we touch one another and sense much of our environment. Through our skin, we feel the smooth cold of melting ice, the warm and gentle breeze of a summer evening, the annoying pinch of an insect bite, the humbling pain of a scraped knee, the soft and calming feel of a mother's hand, the thrill of another's touch. Tazria Mitzorah, so these companion Torah portions, reflect, I would argue, a similar awareness. The laws of Tzarat, as examined thus far, as I've outlined up until now, reinforce the role of skin as a barrier or a boundary. But the Hebrew word roots, and I am at the very beginning and at the end, my role for some of the people here is a professor of Hebrew. The Hebrew word roots that are used throughout these companion parshiot in relation to skin and its disorders underscore the role of skin not just as a border, but also as a medium of communication and of mediation. The word nega, for example, which appears in chapter 13 of Leviticus no less than 40 times, and which is typically translated as a plague, that word nega derives from the Hebrew word verb root nun gimel ayin, which means to touch. Our skin, our first line of human defense in vulnerability, is also our means of experiencing and reaching out to other people. We get negaim, plagues, afflictions, because we're creatures of touch, because our very skin serves as an invitation and a host to others. The teeming repetition of the word nega in this chapter, and those of you who will be staying for later will see just how many times this word appears in the text, itself serves as a kind of verbal representation of the ubiquity of touch and contact. We are all touched, all over, all the time, physically, emotionally, our skin serving as a kind of synecdoche for our very selves. Similar observations can be made about the Hebrew word or, which means skin or leather, throughout these two chapters of Leviticus. The word or recalls the Hebrew verb le'orer, which means to arouse, lehit orer, which means to wake up, or leha'ir, which means to comment, presumably in response to something that someone else said. Our skin, our or, through its interface with others, is a site of continual awakening and interaction. Even more striking is the relationship between the word basar, which means either flesh or skin, another word that proliferates in Leviticus 13, and the Hebrew verb levaser, which means to announce or proclaim news. We proclaim or send tidings, besorot, by mouth, which is one of the few openings, large openings, in our skin. A mivaser, someone who is a bringer of tidings, stands at the very borderline between sadness, joy, and knowledge. The hope for besorot tovot, good tidings, appears all over the traditional Siddur. For example, in a series of blessings that are recited after the lifting of the Torah on Mondays and Thursdays after Torah reading, blessings that I lead every Monday and Thursday at our daily minyan, and which have taken on a kind of heightened meaning over the course of the pandemic and most recently the war in Ukraine. In these blessings, we beseech God in heaven to have compassion on us and on our refugee remnant, and to keep destruction and plague away. We pray that it would be God's will, shenishma v'nitbaser besorot tovot yeshuot v'nechamot, that we hear glad tidings, salvation, and consolation. Similarly, at the end of the Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals, we asked the merciful God, Harachaman, to send us Elijah the prophet, the harbinger of the Messiah, as he is portrayed in the Haftarah for Shabbat Hagadol, which we are observing this Shabbat, that Elijah the prophet, Yevaser lanu besorot v'nechamot, that Elijah will bring us good tidings and consolation. So it is that same root, basar, bet sin resh, that is used over and over again in Leviticus 13 to mark a pathological breach in the skin, that same root is used to suggest a happy turn of fate, a moment not of desolation, but of redemption. It's a complicated, perhaps disturbing proposition to speak of good tidings in the context of illness, suffering, and misfortune. Doing so runs the risk of rushing too quickly to turn something very bad into something very good. And yet, this proposition is at the heart of our religious tradition. Over and over again, biblical and rabbinic tradition tell us stories of redemption and redemptive tidings that feature at their center, paradoxically, a mitzorah, or a group of mitzoraim. Tonight and tomorrow, God willing, I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be studying and learning with you. We'll look at a number of these stories and modern responses to them, stories that can serve as a usable past and a source of redemption and healing for these pandemic and war-torn times. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Zirler, and I hope that everyone will continue to stay later this evening and tomorrow morning to learn more with Dr. Zirler. We'll now, just before the sun sets, take a moment to kindle our lights for Shabbat, to formally welcome in this holy day of rest. I'd invite forward our synagogue president, Warren Haber, to help kindle these lights. Amen. Amen. We'll turn our hearts now towards people who are in need of prayers for healing. And if there's someone you're thinking of this Shabbat who would feel good to know that you had said their name aloud with this community, I invite you now to rise in your place and speak their name at this time. In addition to these names, which have already been spoken aloud, we as a Westchester Reform Temple community are praying this Shabbat for healing for Rachel Rackauer, Jen Leventhal, Mordechai Ben Yaakov, Roberta Friedman, Linda Feldman, Jeffrey Millman, Avraham Feivel Ben Michael, Herschel Ben Sarah, Judy Weiss, Steve Grodzinski, Sarah Haran, Grace Neidish, Avraham Ben Miriam, Yitzchak Halevi Ben Sholem, Elizabeth Hars, Barbara Feldman, Tony and Gina DeLappa, Matthew Atwood, Gloria Byron, Anthony and Elizabeth Danker, Deborah Kapnick, Nicole Shusey, Neil Glaskell, Leah Greenspan, Andrea Reiner, Masha Batsora, Aviva Tzila Bat Esther Bela, Andrew Goldstein, Ken Master, Chava Batsara, Eliyahu Chaim Ben Fradel, Sheila Fried, Malka Tzipora Bas Rachel, Tamar Bat Malka, Heschel Meir Ben David Chana, Reuven Avraham Ben Mordechai Ve'ada, and other names that we carry with us in our hearts. Our Misha Berach prayer for healing can be found on page 371.
Strength.
concluding prayers begin in our Sidurim on page 586. Would the congregation please rise?
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Hearing Dr. Zierler's comments about how skin serves both as a point of separation and also as a point of connection reminded me of this teaching of our traditions that says that for us Jews, the space between the living and the dead is more like a window than a wall. We may have not full access to the people whom we have loved and lost, as one might without any sort of barrier, but nevertheless we can sense their presence. We can feel their love as one might sense something through a window, which we can't actually reach out and touch, but nevertheless can see and feel and sense. And so as we prepare now to offer the words of the Mourner's Kaddish, I'd ask any in our congregation who are in a period of mourning to please rise and be acknowledged in the following order. If you're in the period known as Ani Nut, where death of a loved one has already occurred but burial has not yet taken place, would you please rise to be acknowledged? If you're within the first 7 days of mourning, would you now rise? If you're within the first 30 days of mourning, would you please rise? If you're within the first year of mourning your loved one, would you please rise? And if this Shabbat marks the yahrzeit, the anniversary of your loved one's death, would you please rise? I'd ask the congregation to rise together as one in support of the mourners who are among us. As we remember first those most recently taken from us, in the period of Ani Nut, we remember Paul Rittmaster, father of Peter Rittmaster. And in the first 30 days of mourning, we remember Arthur Gordon, brother-in-law of Frida and Howard Weitz, husband of Lila Gordon and father of Carrie Schlissel and Ellen Rubin, and Susan Schlesinger, mother of Carrie Schlesinger, as well as David ben Aliza. And on their yahrzeit, we remember Samuel Aaron, Robert Bader, Sidney Bassick, Ann Bernstein, Mildred Borer, Dorothy F. Braun, Arnold Braunstein, Minnie Chernin, Ray Cotton, Lester Dembitzer, Hazel Dute, Edith Eisman, Frida Feiner, Alvin Glazer, Theodore Gold, Lenora Goldstein, Henry Graff, Vera Kahn, Samuel S. Kaufman, Richard A. Kirstein, Ann Lichtenstein, Dorothy Mantell, Beatrice Margolis, Yvonne Marks, Lottie Neumer, Jane Nussbaum, Arthur Ox Jr., Edward Piper, Sandra Ortner, Joseph David Perloff, Millicent Rappaport, Faye Rubin, Gerald Rubin, Kenneth Safian, Nathan Samuth, Betty Sarter, Beverly Schaefer, Jay Sheroff, Irving Schreiber, Saul Shapiro, Alan Shedlin, Harry Spector, Ira Toff, Mark Vickers, Seymour Wang, Henry Weissman Jr., Irene Werner, Joel Willis, Elaine Weiner, Hannah Wolf, as well as the victims of the terror shooting in Tel Aviv this week, Eitam Meginin and Tomer Morad, and other names that we carry with us in our hearts. If there are names that have not yet been spoken aloud that you'd like to add to our commemoration, or any that I've inadvertently mispronounced, I invite you to speak them aloud now. The words of the Mourner's Kaddish are found on page 598. We say together, Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba, v'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayachon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach le'olam ulamei omaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitale v'yithalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran ve'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Ose shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
It's now my honor to invite forward the president of Westchester Reform Temple, Warren Haber, to offer a few announcements.
Good evening. For those of you who enjoyed Dr. Zirler's discussion of skin, we have more this weekend. So join us tomorrow morning at 9:30 for Shabbat instead of our normal Torah study minyan, followed by an in-depth study led by Dr. Zirler. We'll conclude the morning with a congregational oneg. This service and study will not be live streamed or recorded, so if you'd like to participate in person, that's the only way. The Men of Reformed Judaism are sponsoring a Passover roundtable discussion on Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. via Zoom. Join our very own Rabbis Blake and Reeser in a small, intimate group discussion via Zoom. If you've ever wondered about what the traditions of the Passover Seder have remained and what's changed over the years, they're going to touch upon many of those. Also like to mention on Wednesday at 7:30, our very own Rabbi Blake is sponsoring an evening discussing his recent trip to Poland. And he also is offering us the opportunity to welcome back from his sabbatical. This event will be live streamed for those who wish to participate remotely. It's on Wednesday, April 13th at 7:30 p.m. And last, but certainly not least, please mark your calendars for Friday, May 20th through Sunday, May 22nd, for our tribute weekend for our very own Rabbi Levy and Rabbi Reeser. I'd like to thank our greeters this evening, Elise Flagg and Arlene Goldsmith. Shabbat Shalom.
In a moment, we'll have the opportunity to bless our challah and our Kaddish wine, but first, let's conclude our service with singing. Would the congregation please rise?
la 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 עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'rahatzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu זיכרון למעשה וראשית כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש זכר ליציאת מצרים כי באנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים בשבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת לחיים. Now, it's been a long time since I've asked the congregation to do this. We used to hold hands and touch arms when we made motzi in recognition that it is not just bread that sustains us, but rather the power of our connection in our community. Now, I am aware that there are all sorts of creepy crawly things floating out there. You might not want to touch the person next to you, but you kind of gesture toward that person. Also, we've learned about the power of touch tonight. So all the more reason to feel connected to one another and, of course, to the source of life. Join us as we bless. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. B'teavon, Shabbat Shalom. Where are we going next?
Please join us in the social hall.
We'll join in the social hall for noshing and learning. Don't go out the main entrance. Luis, Elise, will you close the doors? We'll go out that way. Center doors.
she might